When Astrid demanded the right to lead raids alongside the men, the entire war council erupted in laughter. "Women belong in kitchens, not battlefields," Jarl Magnus sneered, his warriors nodding in agreement. What they didn't know was that Astrid had been training in secret for years, and some lessons are best taught with blood. Astrid Iron-Daughter earned her name not through birth, but through endless hours at her father's forge. While other girls learned weaving and cooking, she hammered red-hot steel into shape, her young arms growing strong from lifting heavy tools, and her mind sharp from understanding the precise temperatures needed to create perfect weapons. Bjorn the blacksmith was one of the most respected craftsmen in Jarl Magnus's settlement. His blades never broke in battle, his armor never failed in combat, and warriors traveled from distant lands to commission his work. But Bjorn had no sons to inherit his knowledge, only Astrid, who showed more natural talent at metalwork than most men possessed. By her 15th winter, Astrid could forge blades that rivaled her father's masterpieces. By her 20th, she was creating weapons that surpassed them. But the clan's warriors treated her skill as an amusing novelty rather than serious craftsmanship. They would praise her work while it was still hot from the forge, then dismiss her presence when discussing the battles where those same weapons would draw blood. "Fine blade, girl," Jarl Magnus would say patronizingly, testing the edge of a sword Astrid had spent weeks perfecting. "Your father taught you well. Now run along. The men have important matters to discuss." Those important matters were always the same: planning raids, dividing treasure, deciding which warriors would earn glory in upcoming battles. Astrid would listen from the shadows as these men planned expeditions using weapons she had crafted, knowing their success would depend partially on her steel, but understanding that her contributions would never be acknowledged. The exclusion burned deeper than any forge fire she had ever faced. Every night, Astrid dreamed of standing shield to shield with the clan's warriors, her blade drinking enemy blood while her voice rose in victory songs. She imagined herself leading charge across foreign shores, claiming treasure through skill and courage rather than inheritance or marriage. But these dreams collided harshly with the reality of Norse society. Women could own property, divorce husbands, and even serve as powerful political advisors. But the battlefield was considered exclusively male territory. A woman's role in warfare was to tend wounds, prepare victory feasts, and raise the next generation of warriors. "It's not natural," the clan mothers would whisper when they thought Astrid wasn't listening. "A girl who spends so much time thinking about swords and battles, it's not healthy. She should be learning to manage a household, not dreaming of spilling blood." Even her father, who genuinely respected her smithing abilities, grew concerned about her warrior fantasies. "Your skill with metal is a gift from the gods," Bjorn would say carefully during their evening conversations. "But fighting is different from forging. Men's bodies are built for battle violence. Women's minds aren't made to handle killing. These limitations felt arbitrary and cruel to someone who understood weapons better than most warriors, who possessed the physical strength to wield them effectively, and who burned with desire to prove her courage in combat." Unable to accept the restrictions placed on her dreams, Astrid began training in secret. Before dawn, when the settlement still slept, she would slip away to isolated clearings where she practiced with weapons she'd forged herself. At first, her technique was crude, raw strength applied without proper form or strategy. But Astrid possessed something more valuable than formal instruction: an intimate understanding of how weapons worked, gained from years of creating them. She knew exactly how much force a blade could withstand, which angles provided maximum cutting efficiency, and how different metals responded to combat stress. This theoretical knowledge, combined with relentless practice, gradually transformed her from an enthusiastic amateur into something approaching genuine competence. She learned to move with weapon weight rather than fighting it, to use an opponent's momentum against them, and most importantly, to remain calm under pressure. But theoretical training had obvious limitations. Astrid needed real instruction from someone who understood combat, not just metalwork. The opportunity came when Olaf One-Eye, a former berserker who'd lost his fighting edge to age and injury, began frequenting her father's forge. Olaf had served Jarl Magnus for 30 years before a Saxon blade took his eye and permanently damaged his sword arm. Now he lived on clan charity, spending his days drinking ale and reminiscing about battles he'd never fight again. Astrid began engaging Olaf in conversations about combat theory, disguising her curiosity as intellectual interest rather than practical preparation. "Tell me about the great raid on Lindisfarne," she would say while sharpening his blade. "How did the shield wall break? What mistakes did the English make?" Olaf, starved for someone who seemed genuinely interested in his experiences, began sharing detailed tactical knowledge. He described specific techniques for fighting multiple opponents, explained how to read an enemy's intentions through body language, and most valuably, demonstrated proper form for various combat situations. "Of course," Olaf would always add with a knowing smile. "This is all just theory for someone like you." Interesting to discuss, but not practical knowledge you'd ever need. Astrid would nod agreement while memorizing every detail he shared. On her 22nd winter, Astrid made her formal request to join the clan's raiding parties. She had prepared for this moment carefully, choosing the right time and audience to maximize her chances of success. The request came during the autumn feast, when Jarl Magnus was in good spirits from successful harvests and profitable trading seasons. Astrid had crafted a magnificent sword specifically for this occasion, a blade that demonstrated her absolute mastery of the smith's art, and presented it as tribute while making her petition. "Jarl Magnus," she said, kneeling formally before the high seat while the entire hall watched, "I offer you this blade, forged by my own hands, as symbol of my desire to serve our clan in battle. I request the honor of joining your warriors in the next raiding season." The hall fell silent. This wasn't the first time Astrid had made such a request, but never so formally or publicly. The entire community waited to see how their Jarl would respond to this unprecedented challenge to traditional gender roles. Magnus examined the sword carefully, testing its balance and edge. Even he had to admit it was exceptional craftsmanship, possibly the finest blade ever created in their settlement, but his response showed that quality metalwork didn't translate to warrior acceptance. "This is beautiful work, Astrid," Magnus said loudly enough for the entire hall to hear. "Your father should be proud of your skill. But warriors are born, not forged. Women belong in kitchens, not battlefields. A pretty blade doesn't make a warrior any more than a battle cry makes a woman into a man." The hall erupted in laughter, not cruel mockery, but the dismissive amusement reserved for children who didn't understand adult realities. These men genuinely believed they were protecting Astrid from dangers she couldn't comprehend, while maintaining traditions that had served their people for generations. "Find yourself a husband, girl," Magnus continued with paternal condescension. "Bear him strong sons who can wield the weapons you forge. That's how women serve in war. Through the warriors they create and support." The third rejection shattered something fundamental in Astrid's spirit. Not her determination or courage, but her willingness to seek permission for what she believed she had already earned through skill and dedication. That night, as the hall continued celebrating around her, Astrid made a decision that would transform her from petitioner into legend. She would no longer ask for warrior status. She would simply take it, proving through action what words had failed to demonstrate. The plan was simple, direct, and impossibly dangerous. She would challenge the clan's warriors to single combat, not to the death, which would be murder, but to submission, which would prove her point without destroying the men whose respect she ultimately wanted to earn. But the challenge couldn't be subtle or private. It had to be public, formal, and undeniable, a demonstration so complete that even the most traditional minds would be forced to acknowledge her capabilities. Astrid spent the next week preparing meticulously. She selected her weapons carefully, choosing equipment that would maximize her advantages while minimizing her physical disadvantages compared to larger male opponents. She studied each potential opponent's fighting style, identifying weaknesses she could exploit and strengths she needed to counter. Most importantly, she prepared mentally for the psychological warfare that would accompany physical combat. These men would try to intimidate her through trash talk, sexual innuendo, and condescending assumptions about female weakness. She needed to remain focused on fighting while ignoring verbal distractions designed to break her concentration. The confrontation came during weapons practice, when the clan's warriors gathered for their weekly training sessions. Astrid appeared at the practice ground in full battle gear, carrying weapons she had forged specifically for this purpose. "I challenge any warrior who believes women cannot fight," she announced, her voice carrying clearly across the training area. "Single combat to submission, witnessed by the entire clan. Any man who defeats me can claim I have no place among warriors. But any man I defeat must acknowledge that skill matters more than gender." The initial reaction was disbelief, followed by nervous laughter. These warriors genuinely didn't understand how to respond to a formal challenge from a woman. Their traditions provided no framework for such situations. "Go home, Astrid," Bjorn Halfbeard called out with patronizing gentleness. "This isn't a game. Someone could get hurt." "Someone will get hurt," Astrid replied calmly. "The question is whether you're brave enough to find out who." The challenge was phrased cleverly. Declining would suggest cowardice, while accepting would mean fighting a woman in front of the entire community. Either choice carried social risks that made the warriors uncomfortable, but Jarl Magnus's response eliminated their options. "Prove yourself then," he said with ale-soaked amusement. "If you can defeat just one of my warriors, we'll consider your request. But when you're lying in the dirt with a broken sword, don't expect sympathy from anyone." Magnus chose Kettle the Strong as Astrid's first opponent, a massive warrior whose primary tactic was overwhelming enemies through sheer physical power. The choice seemed strategic. Kettle's fighting style would emphasize the physical advantages that men possessed over women, making Astrid's defeat appear inevitable rather than shameful. The combat circle formed quickly, with the entire settlement gathering to witness what most expected to be a brief and educational demonstration of why women didn't belong on battlefields. Kettle entered the circle carrying a traditional sword and shield, wearing leather armor that had protected him through dozens of successful battles. He moved with the casual confidence of someone who had never lost single combat against any opponent, let alone a woman blacksmith. Astrid carried weapons specifically designed for her fighting style, a lighter sword with exceptional balance and a smaller shield that wouldn't tire her arms during extended combat. Her armor was also lighter but more strategically placed, protecting vital areas while maintaining mobility advantages. The fight began cautiously, with both combatants testing each other's capabilities. Kettle tried to end things quickly through overwhelming force, using his size and strength to bully Astrid around the combat circle, but size advantages meant nothing if they couldn't make contact. Astrid had spent years studying metallurgy and physics. She understood leverage, momentum, and the precise application of force in ways that purely instinctive fighters never mastered. When Kettle charged with his massive sword raised high, Astrid didn't try to match his strength. Instead, she stepped aside at the last possible moment, using his own momentum to send him stumbling past her while her blade found the gap between his armor plates. The cut wasn't deep, but it drew first blood, and demonstrated that Astrid could strike without being struck in return. The watching crowd fell silent as they realized this might not be the quick lesson in female limitations they had expected. What followed wasn't a single dramatic victory, but a systematic dismantling of every assumption the clan held about combat and gender. Astrid fought with scientific precision, treating each opponent like a problem to be solved rather than an enemy to be destroyed. Against Kettle's brute strength, she used speed and technique. Against Eric Swiftblade's quick attacks, she employed superior strategy and positioning. Against Ullman Shieldbiter's defensive expertise, she demonstrated innovative tactics that no traditional warrior had ever encountered. Each victory was decisive but not humiliating. Astrid fought to prove her point, not to destroy men she hoped would eventually become allies. She demonstrated superior skill without unnecessarily damaging warrior pride or creating permanent enemies. But the psychological impact was devastating. These were men who had defined their entire identities around their fighting abilities, who measured their worth through combat success, who believed that warrior skill was inherently masculine. Watching a woman defeat them using superior technique rather than dirty tricks or lucky accidents forced them to confront assumptions they had never questioned. If a woman could outfight experienced warriors through pure skill, what did that mean about the nature of warfare itself? By the time Astrid had defeated her seventh opponent, the laughter had completely disappeared from the watching crowd. This was no longer a amusing demonstration of female delusion. It was a revolution in how their society understood gender and capability. Jarl Magnus himself entered the circle for the eighth fight, not because he particularly wanted to fight a woman, but because his leadership required him to address what was becoming a fundamental challenge to traditional clan structure. "You've proven your point, girl," Magnus said as he drew his sword. "You can fight better than most of my warriors, but leadership requires more than individual skill. Can you inspire men to follow you into death? Can you make the hard decisions that get people killed for necessary victories?" "Let me prove it," Astrid replied, raising her shield. "Give me the chance to lead, and judge me by results rather than assumptions." The fight that followed was different from the previous 7. Magnus was a genuinely skilled warrior who had earned his leadership through decades of successful combat. He wouldn't be defeated by technique alone. Astrid needed to demonstrate the kind of tactical brilliance that separated good fighters from great leaders. The battle was longer, more complex, and more dangerous than anything that had come before. Magnus used every advantage his experience provided, testing not just Astrid's fighting ability, but her capacity to adapt under pressure, think strategically while in physical danger, and maintain composure when facing superior opposition. But Astrid had advantages that Magnus couldn't counter. Her weapons were perfectly suited to her fighting style because she had forged them herself. Her understanding of metallurgy allowed her to predict exactly how his gear would respond to different types of stress. Most importantly, her years of secret training had prepared her for precisely this type of complex, high-stakes combat. When Magnus's sword finally hit the ground in submission, the entire settlement understood that they were witnessing history. The old rules no longer applied. Gender limitations that had seemed natural and inevitable were revealed as arbitrary social constructions that could be challenged and overcome. Astrid's victory didn't immediately transform Norse society. Cultural change happens gradually through accumulated examples rather than single dramatic events, but it did establish her right to lead warriors into battle and proved that skill mattered more than tradition when lives were at stake. Her first raid, launched the following spring, was a masterpiece of tactical planning and flawless execution. Astrid chose targets that maximized profit while minimizing casualties, used innovative strategies that caught enemies completely unprepared, and led from the front in every engagement. The warriors who had initially resented following a woman's leadership gradually became her most devoted supporters. Astrid's raids were more successful, more profitable, and significantly safer than traditional Viking expeditions. She achieved, through superior planning and tactical intelligence, what other leaders attempted through raw courage and overwhelming force. More importantly, she began training other women who showed interest and aptitude for warfare, not forcing anyone to abandon traditional roles, but ensuring that those who wanted different paths had examples to follow and mentors to guide them. The clan that had once mocked her warrior dreams eventually became known throughout the North for producing the most feared shield maidens in Viking history. Women who had learned that strength came in many forms, that courage could be demonstrated through intelligence as well as physical bravery, and that tradition was just another word for decisions that could be changed when better options became available. Standing on the deck of her longship, watching her mixed-gender crew prepare for another successful expedition, Astrid understood that the greatest victories weren't won through superior violence, but through forcing people to question assumptions they had never realized they were making. Some battles are fought with swords and shields. Others are won by proving that the battlefield itself was bigger than anyone had imagined. If this tale of ultimate payback moved you, hit that like button and let us know in the comments which part shocked you the most. Subscribe to Time for Payback for more legendary stories where betrayal meets justice, and don't forget to ring that notification bell, because every betrayal has its reckoning, and every story holds the power to change everything. What revenge story should we tell next? Drop your suggestions below. Until next time, remember, karma never forgets.